We are starting the contemporary issues or miscellaneous issues of the chapter national income, and some of the concepts we are going to discuss here. The first one is secular growth rate and next one is Hindu growth rate. In fact, both are discussed, both are connected to each other, and both are complementary to each other. The story is that Professor Raj Krishna, one of the well-known economists, he studied Indian economic for the period of 1951 to 81, and he got that during such a long period of 30 years, the average annual growth rate of Indian economy was only 3.5%. It was annual growth rate of Indian economy in 1951 to 81. For such a long period of 30 years, the growth rate was considered very low, and that was referred by him as the Hindu growth rate. Prima facie, the term Hindu growth rate is looking as a religious term, but in fact, it's nowhere connected with the Hindus anymore. Here, the only the comparison is there. He clarified that as Hindu people, Hindu community continue to maintain their traditions, customs, and rituals, irrespective of good or bad, for a longer period. It means it's not easy to bring any change in the rituals, in their customs. Similarly, the low growth rate of Indian economy, low growth rate of 3.5%, is just continuing in the same manner. So that's why that low growth rate was compared with the Hindus rituals and Hindus customs, and thereafter it was named as Hindu growth rate. But in course of time, when around 90s, India's growth rate was just doubled of 3.5%, around 7%, 6%. It was termed by some other economists as New Hindu growth rate. Some other critics told that this is Sardar growth rate. So in this way thereafter, a lot of analysis, different kind of analysis were started emerging. More recently, during the past years, we assumed higher and higher growth rate of Indian economy, and that is signified to secular growth rate. Secular growth rate could be understood properly with respect to the Hindu growth rate, since in the very beginning the term Hindu growth rate was used. That's why when the growth rate just started expanding and the scenario of growth was brighter in future, that was termed as secular growth rate. That is not connected to the any this kind of negativity, any kind of lower trajectory of the growth rate. So in this way, growth rate, secular growth rate indicates that a higher growth rate and the prospects of higher and higher growth rate in future. So in this way, these terms, both Hindu growth rate and secular growth rates, are analyzed and discussed. When you go through article in the newspapers, when you go here, the discussion on the TV channels among the intellectuals, among the economists, they use this term and they write like that once upon a time for a longer period of 30 years we faced Hindu growth rate, but now we have come out from that particular era and now we can talk about the secular growth rate. So in this particular perspective, these two terms are used. So we can also use it as per the requirement. Okay, but both the term are nowhere connected with the any religion. So you should not get confused whenever any question is being asked in the exam. So it's just a comparison, nothing else. Okay. The next one is NSSO. I have already told about CSO and NSSO. NSSO means National Sample Survey Organization. When it was established in 1950, it was organization, but later on it came under MOSPI, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, and thereafter started known as Office, National Sample Survey Office. And the main function of NSSO was to collect samples and the sample of data for the unorganized or informal sector of economy. Unorganized or informal sector of economy means those sectors not properly registered anywhere. There is no registration, there is no proper data is available. That's why survey is conducted from time to time by NSSO. I have already clarified that this year in beginning both NSSO and CSO and NSSO have been merged together, and the name of the new organization is NSO, that is National Statistical Organization. Okay, so the erstwhile name CSO and NSO no longer is in practice. Okay, the next concept is COR and ICOR. COR, that is capital output ratio, and ICOR means incremental capital output ratio. This concept helps us to understand the analysis of economies everywhere across the world, not only in India. Just try to understand. As far as the capital output ratio is concerned, it is the ratio of required units of capital to produce an unit of output. COR. COR is required, it is the ratio of required units of capital to produce an unit of output. Say for example, suppose to produce 1 unit of output, 4 units of capital is required. You know, just try to understand simply. To produce anything, we need certain capital. So after the production, what's the ratio between the units of capital and the units of production? That is COR. Okay. Suppose I just give you the example. If for to produce 1 unit of output, 4 units of capital is required. So obviously COR would be 4 is to 1. 4 is to 1. More important thing is that suppose in a particular country this ratio is decreasing. Either it will decrease or it will increase. But decreasing this ratio indicates that a same unit is going to be produced in the lesser unit of capital, and obviously it's good for an economy. So therefore whenever there is technological improvement in any economy, technological enhancement in economy will grow in future. Gradually the COR start reducing. That's why COR of developed countries in the world is comparatively lesser than the COR of the developed countries. So for this particular purpose it is used. Similarly, incremental capital output ratio, that is ICOR, is the ratio of extra units of capital to produce 1 extra unit of output. Just try to understand. Everyone knows that, you know it better. To produce more and more, producers have to invest more capital. So whatever the additional capital is going to be invested, what's the result in terms of output? So ICOR indicates an advanced stage of production, that is the ratio between the extra capital and the extra units of production. Okay, and that's why ICOR is also known as capital coefficient or accelerator coefficient. These are two more names of ICOR. Okay, so in this way ICOR and ICOR, though these are frequently asked in examination, but apart from that this will also help us to analyze the economic activities. Okay, as far as the next term is concerned, the next term is disposable income. This equation helps us to understand disposable income is equal to personal income minus personal direct taxes. It means that whatever a person is earning, the entire income is not disposable. When a person pays the direct taxes and thereafter the income consumed by him, that will be considered as disposable income. So that's why this equation would help us to understand the meaning of disposable income is equal to personal income minus personal direct taxes. Okay. And suppose, say for example, personal income is here 10 lakh and personal direct taxes are 2 lakh. So 10 lakh minus 2 lakh, the disposable income is equal to 8 lakh. So just consider what would happen with this 8 lakh. There are two possibilities. Either this 8 lakh will be consumed, and suppose some portion of that 8 lakh is not consumed, that will be considered as savings. So once again here there is another equation not mentioned here. Disposable income will be again equal to consumptions plus savings. So there will be two equations here. Disposable income is equal to personal income minus personal direct taxes, and again equal to consumptions plus savings. Okay. Similarly, there is a concept green GDP. You know, the term green nowadays is very familiar, and conceptually whenever the term green is there, it relates to the environmental issues. So it is also considered with respect to the GDP or GNP both as per the requirement. Here the equation is reflecting the entire meaning of the green GDP. Green GDP is equal to GDP minus environmental depletion or environmental lossage. You know, GDP is the value of production. We have already discussed several times. But in order to get more production, we are creating a lot of nuisances with the environment, like cutting the trees, polluting the water, and these kind of problems. So whenever this kind of environmental losses and depletions are deducted, their value, the value of these losses are deducted from the total value of GDP, we get the green GDP. You may put up the question, in what way it is monetized? In what way the losses of environment is monetized? So it's an expertise issue. There are certain experts, there are certain parameters. It's not our issue to discuss here. So whatever it may be, whatever the value they decide, that will be deducted from GDP, and the value obtained, that will be referred to as green GDP. But implications are more important for us for the examination point of view. Say for example, if there is any question, what would happen when the green GDP of a country is increasing, whether increasing or decreasing? Just try to understand. The green GDP will be increased here when the depletion will be lesser. Depletion will be lesser, it means that there are less environmental depletion. It's good for the economy. So it means that the higher value of green GDP is a good indication. It's a better indication, a positive indication for an economy. So the concept of green GDP is viable and relevant in two ways. First, whatever the losses of environment we have done in past, how to minimize them, and second, whatever the losses we have done, how to compensate them. So if a country is just considering green GDP, estimating it, this could be used in two different ways, and two different relevance would be proved here. Next is a real and nominal GDP. A real GDP and nominal GDP. These terms are frequently used in the analysis of economics as well as in the examination also. Here you will have to remember, you will have to understand that when GDP is estimated at the price of the base year, we have already discussed about base year or fixed base year is also known as fixed year. For example, as of now, the government is taking 2011-12 as base year for the estimation of GDP. So when the GDP is estimated at the price of base year, that is called real GDP. And when a rate of inflation is added to the real GDP, we get the nominal GDP. So the meaning of nominal GDP, it is if GDP is estimated at the current price. Nominal GDP is if the GDP is estimated at the current price, and everyone knows that at the current price there is a impact of inflation. So here we can get an equation not mentioned here. Nominal GDP is equal to real GDP plus the rate of inflation. Once again I am repeating, nominal GDP is equal to real GDP plus rate of inflation. Okay. In practice, whatever the rate of GDP, whatever the growth rates are reflecting in the newspaper, are reflected by the government, that is all about real GDP. So whatever the growth rate we discuss always in practice, 4%, 5%, whatever it may be, with respect to the global economy, with respect to the Indian economy, that is all about real GDP. And when for any particular year the rate of interest is added to the real GDP, we get the nominal GDP. Say for example, for the year 2020, say for example only, suppose the growth rate of GDP is 5%, and this year the average rate of inflation is suppose 3%. So the nominal GDP will be equal to 5% plus 3%, that is 8%. So that's the in this way the real GDP and nominal GDP is discussed and analyzed. Uh, every year the data relating to GDP is available by NSO or MOSPI, and it reflects a lot of things to us. As here I am just sharing some data with you. Here these data are available from MOSPI, that is Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. It has been mentioned here GDP for 2020, nominal GDP was 3.2 trillion. Okay, at the PPP it is more than that. Rank of on the basis of value of GDP, last year in 2019, India ranks the 5th position in the world. I have already told you in the very beginning. As far the growth rate is concerned, in 2017-18 the growth rate was 7%, and this way it is just fluctuating from time to time. We have already talked about that, because due to COVID-19 and the consequent impact, there is a possibility that the growth rate will decline, and some other facts have been given, not so important. Here some GDP by sectors. Here the contribution in the last year, that is in 2019, the contribution of agriculture sector in our GDP was 15.4%. The contribution of industrial sector 23%, and the services 61.5%. It is estimated data for 2017. Okay, so in this way there are some more data here given. The contribution of GDP of household consumption, this is also based on the data available in 2017, 59.1%. Okay, investment in fixed capital 28.5%, and some more data have been given. But okay, now the next issue is the economic system. We need to understand here the meaning of economic system. You know, to run and to achieve any kind of objective, we need to develop a system. Similarly, to achieve the economic objectives across the world by the different countries of the world, different kind of systems have been developed. When we analyze it in detail, you may find that there are three economic systems are prevailing across the world, and these are the well-known name: capitalistic economic system, socialistic economic system, and mixed economic system. You must know that each and every country of the world adopted one of them. As everyone knows, India adopted mixed economic system after independence. Okay. Mixed economic system, obviously it is combination of first two, capitalistic economic system and socialistic economic system. It means that to understand, for the better understanding of mixed economic system, we must have the basic idea of capitalistic and socialistic economic system. Okay. So one by one, we'll just try to understand the main features and the main characteristics of all these economic systems. But before going forward, we need to discuss here something or something else. You always from time to time hear about the third world countries. Why directly on third world? Why not first and second world? So you must know here. First world is capitalistic economic system. Second world is socialistic, wherever the socialistic economic system, and those countries adopted mixed economic system are referred to as third world countries. So we can say that mixed economic system is one of the characteristics of economic characteristics of the third world countries. Third world countries are those countries those have been colony of Europe or America in past, and after some years they got independent. India is the best example. In 1947 we got independent from Britain. Okay. And all these countries, broadly third world countries, are prevailing in Asia and African continent, because almost all countries of Asia and Africa would have been the colony of European and America, and after some years they got independent. So when they got independent, they had to face the similar kind of economic challenges, and that's why they just adopted mixed economic system. Okay, some years back what happened, United Nations set out the concept of fourth world. This fourth world term is used for the countries poorest among poor. You might have heard about the LDCs, least developed countries. These fourth world countries are also referred to as least developed countries, and most of these countries are situated in Africa. If you see the map of Africa, starting from Sudan to Mauritania, around 32 to 34 countries are lying there, and this particular region is known as the famine belt of the world. Famine belt of the world. Why? Because in this area always there is a strife, no resources, hunger. Means the people living there are fighting for their survival, and that's why that has been termed as fourth world. And it is expected that the entire world meeting together will help them, and this is going on. Now come on the capitalistic economic system. Capitalistic economic system is also known as in two different names, that is laissez-faire economic system and marketed economic system. Laissez-faire means non-intervention, non-intervention, non-intervention of the government. When we consider the main features of capitalistic economic system, uh, you must know America is the iconic example of the capitalistic economic system. So if you are clear about the American economy, the most of the features of capitalistic system will be clear to all of us. So we can just recall it in a points manner. The first important feature of capitalistic economic system is that the means of production are generally owned by private individuals. It means that the entire productive activity is handled by the private sector without intervention of the government. So in this system there is less intervention or even no intervention of the government, and that's why this is called laissez-faire economic system. Second main feature is that uh, in this system, demand and supply, that is market forces, play vital role. Market forces plays vital role, and having seen their role, these forces are termed as two invisible hands by the father of economics, Adam Smith. According to Adam Smith, if no one is controlling this system, there is less government intervention. So who is controlling? Who is running the system? These are two invisible hands not looking, and these are demand and supply. So this economy, this system is entirely market driven, and most of the problems prevailing in this economy is resolved through the mechanism of demand and supply itself without intervention of the government. Okay. Another main feature of capitalistic economic system is uh, in the price mechanism there is no intervention of the government. Obviously, whenever the market forces will play, so obviously the price of each and every commodity will be decided by the market, not by the government. As even today in our country, somewhere directly or indirectly, government is affecting the prices. But it doesn't happen in all these nations wherever the capitalistic system is in practice. One another feature is that democracy is rather stronger in all these economies. Democracy means freedom. Wherever there is democracy and wherever there is freedom, people will be entitled to decide their profession, their jobs, their according to their liking and disliking. No one is going to stop them, no one is going to disturb them. So there is a massive freedom in these countries, and that's why they are growing. One another feature is that consumers are in powerful position. Consumers are in powerful position. Why? Because they are having handsome income in their hands, and that's why they are in position to dominate the market. And that's why there is a slogan that consumer is king. The consumer is king like idea and concept is totally fit on capitalistic economic system. So in this way, we can say that these are some main features of capitalistic economic system. And generally, even today, all the developed countries of the world are maintaining capitalistic economic system. So we can say that obviously it's a good system. But whenever we need to criticize something and we have to find out some certain limitations of the systems, we'll have to do it. The first limitation that we can mention here is there is a centralization of capital. Centralization of capital in the system. Second, if there is centralization of capital, there will be inequality of income. Third, there might be chances of class conflict because broadly in the system there are two separate classes, industrialists and laborers, and their motives are contradictory to each other. Industrialists want more production, less wages. Laborers want more wages, less work. So there might be some chances of class conflict, but you can't give me any big example of this kind of conflict. Why? Because the labor class is getting handsome salary in the system, and that's why as they are largely they are satisfied with their economic conditions, and that's why they are not raising any voice against their owner and their against the industrialist. But today nowadays we Indian are getting benefited due to high salary, highly paid salary in those countries in form of different kind of outsourcing, business process outsourcing, legal process outsourcing. And even today in our country 5 to 6 lakh of youth are just have got job in the outsourcing sector in our country. It is because of the salaries and the wages are higher in the developed countries. So in India some people are working for the Foreign companies at a lower wage, but even after that they are satisfied here. So in this way we are getting benefited. Another limitation you could find that sometime there is a possibility. I'm not saying that this is going to be happen. There is possibility of negligence of social welfare, because suppose in developed countries if anyone just get deprived due to water, due to electricity, so our statement, our concept will be proved there. But generally it didn't happen. It generally seldom it happens, because in those countries everything is in private sector, and suppose a particular person not capable to purchase all these basic necessities by paying substantially, he will be deprived. But there is no this kind of possibility there. That's why whatever the criticism we are speaking and mentioning here, there are, it's a completely analytical issue, and doesn't mean that this is uniform across the system. Lastly, we can criticize a capitalistic system with respect to certain macroeconomic events that takes place from time to time, like high unemployment, high inflation, recession like situations. If there is any recent example that took place around 2008-9, when more than 120 banks of America were failed, and consequently the entire world engulfed under a recession. In a case of recession, in a situation of recession, first demand falls rapidly. When demand falls rapidly, profit, employment, business started declining, and situation becomes critical. When the situation of recession continues for a longer period, that is referred to as depression. There is no recent example of depression. If there is any example, that is the Great Depression of 1929-30s. Okay, so you can say that the recession and depression are the two sides of the same coin. In fact, recession and depression are the part of the trade cycle. Trade cycle or business cycle, as per the economists, these are the four phases of economy that takes place from time to time, and these are the boom, recession, depression, and recovery. Boom means it is that phase of economy when each and every economic activity in higher trajectory at the top gear, and whenever there is any slackening in them, that is referred to as recession. But under recession, first demand falls rapidly. Okay, so we talked about recession and depression. In both the cases of recession and depression, unemployment becomes critical, and in the critical conditions, industries and businesses are getting closed. In such a condition, government intervention is inevitable. Means government intervention is required, and massive affirmative actions are taken by the government, like injecting more money, reducing rate of tax, printing more money, providing more subsidies, and all these steps are collectively known as fiscal stimulus. To stimulate the economy, these mechanisms are adopted. Okay, as a result, things are start correcting, and that is called recovery, and the cycle is completed. So it means that it happens from time to time. Even time frame is not fixed, and it not going to be happen in a very frequent manner, but generally this kind of situation prevail in the global economy. Okay, you may put up the question how to recognize the recession. Just let me clarify, because it has been the question. uh, just you must remember that when the rate of industrial production is negative for more than 2 quarters or 3 consecutive quarters, that could be an indication of recession. And once again I'm repeating, when the rate of industrial production is negative means it is in minus consistently for more than 2 quarters, means more than 6 months, or for 3 quarter or the 9 months, that could be a indication of recession. So in this way recession is recognized, and it is managed in this way. Okay, so it was all about capitalistic economic system. An iconic example of capitalistic economic system is America, France, Germany, Britain, and Japan, and might be more. Now come on the socialistic economic system. Socialistic economic system is based upon the idea of Karl Marx. Marx was born in Germany and he wrote two famous books, Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto. And for the first time in these books, the voice were raised in the favor of downtrodden people and the labor class of the world. And the idea of Marx was so revolutionary that a reaction was inevitable. And the first reaction was taken place in Russia, where there was a rule of Tsar, and that was a feudal system completely based upon exploitation. So in 1917, Bolshevik revolution was taken place in Russia, and first this kind of government, this kind of system emerged in Russia, and thereafter Russia known as USSR, that is Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, and it continued till 1990. But around 1990 it was disintegrated, and after disintegration all the members countries of USSR, that is 12 member countries of the USSR, were independent and thereafter known as the CIF, that is Commonwealth of Independent States, and Russia is one of them. And since then, since 1990, Russia is adopting capitalistic economic system. One more example is China, Cuba are some best example of socialistic economic system in the world. As far as China is concerned, China has adopted a different kind of mechanism under socialistic system. Their economy is completely open today. They have adopted the elements of marketed economy, but there is no democracy. There is no democracy. There is no public. There is no importance of public opinion in China. Their system and the rules and regulations are even very strict. As far as this socialist economic system and their features are concerned, it is also known as centralized planned economic system. Centralized planned economic system, and the concept is that this system will be based upon social justice and equality. Social justice and equality. And what happens under this system? Generally, means of production, distribution, and price determination are controlled by the government, controlled by the state, and that's why it is centralized, and therefore it is not generally accepted by the other countries because it's a very strict system, because there is no freedom, there is no relevance of individual opinions. So that's the in this way, whatever the main features of socialistic system, in our opinion the same features are the criticism itself, because no one would like to be overruled by any such kind of strict rule where there is no public opinion, where there is no relevance of individual opinion. So that's why this system is not very much popular, and that's why it has been confined very few numbered countries of the world like North Korea, Cuba. In Cuba it has been considered very successful because educational facilities quite robust in Cuba. No no fees is paid in Cuba for any kind of education. No fees is paid for any health facility. So it's quite successful in Cuba, and it was it was established in Cuba by Fidel Castro in 1959, and thereafter still it is in practice. Now come to the mixed economic system. After independence, India adopted mixed economic system, and under this system, both development of both public and private sectors are brought into focus, which means that under mixed economic system, both public sector and private sector run side by side and contribute to the economic development. That is the main features of mixed economic system. But when we consider its development in our country, it could be divided into two phases. Means the development of mixed economic system in India is divided into two phases, discussed into two part, you can say. The first is pre-reform period, starting from independent 1948 to 1990, and second post-reform period 1990 to till now. We have already discussed the economic crisis of 1990, and that is the dividing line. Before 1990 means during the first phase of mixed economic system, government policies were socialistic oriented. Means orientation of government policies were socialistic, and that's why government imposed strict rules and regulations over the activities of the private sector, and a lot of rules regulations were imposed on the activities of the private sector. So private sector was under control of the government during the first phase. Meanwhile, the crisis of 1990 took place, and thereafter government started economic reforms around 1990, especially in 1991. But thereafter, government policies started orienting towards marketed economic system. So there is a big change after 1990 in our economy, and after 1990, the government policies are market oriented, market driven, and that's why you have seen that government is promoting the private sector. Government is just trying to ease down their own control, and majority almost all economic activities are being handed over by the government to the private sector. So it's a big change in our country after 1991, and that's why the Indian economy nowadays could be considered as and could be better expressed as market oriented mixed economic system. That is what exactly going on.